The applause started before I realized my name wasn't on the slide. I was sitting in the third row of the glass conference room, notebook open out of habit, pen resting between my fingers like muscle memory. The screen at the front of the room glowed with a clean title, Strategic Platform Rollout. Under it, in bold "IDE," were two names. Neither of them was mine. Trent will be leading this initiative, the CEO said, smiling proudly as his son stepped forward. With Gavin overseeing execution, Trent adjusted his jacket, nodded like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, and launched into a summary of a project I had spent 15 months building line by line. My timelines, my risk models, my mitigation plans. He spoke smoothly, confidently, and vaguely enough that no one noticed he was skimming the surface of something he didn't understand. People clapped. Someone behind me whispered, "Impressive." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. More familiar. 15 months earlier, the company's founder had pulled me aside after a late meeting. "I need someone who won't turn this into politics," he'd said. "Someone who understands the system, not just the spotlight." That was how the project landed on my desk. Quietly, permanently. Now it had been lifted just as quietly. When the meeting broke, Gavin approached me with that practiced half-smile he used when he wanted compliance without a paper trail. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," he said. "You're good at details. Trent needs the visibility." I nodded. The way I always did. "Of course," I said. Then, lightly, "Who's signing off on compliance acceptance?" His smile thinned. "Trent will." I looked at him for a second longer than necessary. Then I smiled back. "Okay." Just so you know, I paused. Just enough to let the silence stretch. That project, actually, I didn't finish the sentence. Gavin's eyes flickered. Trent, a few steps away, stopped laughing mid-conversation and glanced over, like he'd felt a draft in a sealed room. As I gathered my things, a small placard near the exit caught my eye. One of those corporate reminders about ethics and storytelling used in internal training materials. This presentation is fictional. Any resemblance is coincidental. I almost laughed at the irony, because what was unfolding in front of me felt rehearsed, scripted like a story someone else thought they could control. But this wasn't a presentation. It wasn't a metaphor. And it definitely wasn't finished. By the time I reached my desk, the congratulations had already started circulating. Slack lit up with emojis and vague praise. Huge win. Excited for what's next. People loved celebrating a result more than understanding how it was built. I closed the messages without replying and opened the folder I hadn't touched since the founder first trusted me with the project. Inside was nothing flashy. No pitch decks, no slogans, just documents. 15 months earlier, Elliot Crane had leaned against the edge of my desk and said, "If this ever becomes a trophy for someone who didn't earn it, I want safeguards." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He just asked me to design the project like it mattered. So I did. The platform wasn't just code and timelines. It was intellectual property tied to regulatory compliance, client warranties, and implementation authority. Every phase required a specific sign-off, someone trained, certified, and accountable. Not a title, a qualification. I was the authorized liaison. Not because I demanded it, but because someone had to be responsible when things went wrong. I scrolled to the final document implementation authorization file. It was boring, precise, and completely unforgiving. A ping pulled my attention away. An email from Gavin already looping in the client. "Trent Hale will be your executive sponsor moving forward." I stared at the sentence longer than I should have. Then I forwarded the email to legal with a single line. "Can you confirm whether Trent meets authorization requirements for compliance acceptance?" I didn't add commentary. I didn't explain context. I let the question stand on its own weight. While I waited, I reviewed the upcoming milestones. The launch showcase, the client demo, the public commitments being made without checking who was allowed to make them. Another ping. Legal replied quickly. "He doesn't. If he signs, the compliance warranty is void. Client would be within rights to suspend the contract. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. They thought they'd stolen my work. What they'd actually inherited was my risk. And risk, when mishandled, doesn't explode. It accumulates. Quietly, methodically, I minimized the document, folded my hands, and waited. Because once compliance is broken, there's no applause loud enough to cover the silence that follows. By the afternoon, the project had already started changing shape without me. Jules stopped by my desk first. He didn't sit down. He never did when he was nervous. They want the team to reformat the deck, he said. More executive, less detail. I nodded once. Did they say why Trent wants it to match his presentation style? That told me everything. Style over substance. Shine over structure. Don't touch production. I said calmly. No code. No configs. No deployments. Jules frowned. Gavin's pushing. Hard. Then ask him for the request in writing. I replied. And CC me. Jules hesitated. Then nodded. He understood. He always had. Back at my desk, I opened a clean document and started a list not emotional. Not dramatic. Just facts. Who had authority? Who was asking for access? Who had responded and who hadn't? This wasn't sabotage, it was documentation. My phone buzzed, a message from Trent. You'll be fine. It read, you're great at the details. Let the leaders handle the big picture. I stared at the screen, then typed a single word. Noted. That was all. The thing about risk is that it doesn't announce itself. It waits. It collects small decisions, casual shortcuts, unchecked assumptions. People like Trent thought risk was something that happened to other people, smaller companies, weaker teams. They didn't understand that this project was designed to fail safely, or rather, to refuse participation when mishandled. I pulled up the compliance timeline again. Every step they were skipping had a purpose. Every signature they were rushing past existed to protect the company from exactly this kind of internal theater. They thought they had taken my work. What they'd actually taken was ownership of every consequence tied to it. And the longer they pretended otherwise, the more precise those consequences would become. By the end of the day, my inbox held 3 unanswered questions from legal, 2 forwarded demands from Gavin, and a calendar invite titled Project Launch Showcase. I clicked accept, not because I planned to smile, but because I wanted a front row seat when the shortcuts caught up to them. The calendar invite arrived just before noon. Project Launch Showcase mandatory attendance. Clients, board observers, press. Trent was listed as host, Gavin as executive sponsor. My name appeared near the bottom, tagged as operations support. I stared at the screen for a moment, then clicked accept. A few minutes later, Gavin's message followed, clipped and overly polite. Be professional, show up, smile. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my inbox and walked down 2 floors to legal. Nina didn't look surprised when I stepped into her office. She'd already pulled the relevant policy up on her screen, sections highlighted in yellow. They're moving fast, she said. Too fast? They always do when they think speed looks like leadership, I replied. She leaned back. If they proceed without proper authorization, the compliance warranty is void, public demo or not. I know, I said. That's why I'm not stopping them. Nina studied me for a second. You're not trying to burn the company. No, I said. I'm trying to keep it from being burned down by people who don't understand what they're holding. Back at my desk, Jules messaged again. They want early access to the compliance folder? Who's asking? I typed. Trent. Says it's just a formality. I told Jules not to grant anything without a written request. I could almost hear the relief in his reply. That afternoon, the office buzzed with the artificial excitement of a countdown. Marketing circulated mock-ups. Sales talked about bonuses like they were already guaranteed. Trent walked past my desk twice, laughing loudly, shaking hands, playing the role he'd been given. When he caught my eye, he flashed a confident grin. Big day coming, he said. You'll see. This is going to be great for all of us. I smiled back, measured and calm. I'm sure it will be informative. As the day wound down, another email came in, this one forwarded to half the department. Final review scheduled. No delays. I shut down my computer and gathered my things. They thought the showcase was a celebration. To me, it looked more like a stress test. And systems, when pushed beyond their limits, don't fail loudly. They fail precisely. The request came late in the afternoon. Flagged as urgent. Trent wanted full access to the compliance folder. Not view only. Not a summary. Full permissions documents. Authorization files. Audit trails. The kind of access you don't ask for unless you plan to sign something you shouldn't. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I forwarded the request to Nina in legal and copied Gavin, keeping my tone deliberately neutral. Before granting access, can you confirm that Trent has completed the required compliance training and is authorized to sign acceptance for this release? No accusations. No subtext. Just a question. The reply came faster than I expected. Nina, he hasn't. If he signs, it's a policy violation. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Gavin, what are you doing? He asked. Skipping the pleasantries. Following procedure. I said, you're creating friction. He snapped. This is a formality. Then it should be easy to document. I replied. There was a pause. I could almost hear him weighing his options pressure versus paper trail. Grant the access, he said finally. We'll handle the rest. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. I can't do that without written confirmation. From you, silence stretched across the line. You're being difficult, he said. No, I corrected gently. I'm being precise. He hung up without another word. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address, someone in compliance operations. The wording was awkward, rushed, full of assurances that everything was aligned and approved in principle. It wasn't a signature. It was a favor request disguised as authority. I forwarded it to Nina. Her response was immediate. Do not grant access. This is coercion. Across the floor. I saw Trent pacing near the conference rooms. Phone pressed to his ear. Frustration slipping through his polished confidence. When he spotted me watching, he forced a grin and gave me a small wave. I returned it. Calm, polite. The kind of smile that says nothing and promises consequences. They thought this was about ego, about credit, about who stood on stage. What they didn't understand was that once you start bending rules to save face, the rules stop bending back. And the break, and when it comes, is never subtle. They didn't back off. By the next morning, the pressure shifted less direct, more creative. That was how I knew they were running out of clean options. Jules caught me by the coffee machine. Voice low. Someone from compliance pulled me aside. He said, asked if we could just move things along, said it came from above. Did they put it in writing? I asked. He shook his head. No, but they hinted there'd be consequences if we slowed the timeline. That was the shortcut. Not a forged signature. Not a blatant override. Something quieter, a favor, a nudge. The kind of pressure that makes reasonable people do unreasonable things so no one looks bad. Did you get an email? I asked. Jules hesitated, then nodded. He pulled out his phone and forwarded me a message chain. The language was casual, almost friendly. We just need this done. It's already been approved in principle. Don't worry about the paperwork, but the sender list told a different story. Gavin was copied. I thanked Jules and told him to step back. Completely. If anyone asks, I said, tell them you're waiting on me. Back at my desk. I didn't rush to escalate. I read the emails again. Twice. This wasn't just impatience. This was coercion pressure to bypass a control point designed to protect the company. I forwarded the thread to Nina with a single line. Does this qualify as signature coercion under policy? Her reply came a minute later. Yes, if they proceed. It triggers an internal review, and it won't stop at this project. I stared at the screen. Escalating now would freeze everything. It would also paint a target on my back. They'd call me difficult, disloyal, someone who couldn't read the room. But if I stayed quiet and someone caved, the damage would spread outward to the client, to the company, to people like Jules who didn't have the luxury of walking away. I closed my eyes for a moment and made the decision. I wasn't going to warn them again. I drafted a short, factual message to legal, attaching the emails, requesting a formal compliance review effective immediately. No commentary, no emotion. Then I sent it. Across the floor, I could see Trent laughing with a group from sales, confident and relaxed, already enjoying the future he thought he'd secured. He didn't know it yet, but the shortcut he'd taken didn't lead forward. It led straight into the record. The launch showcase felt less like a celebration and more like a performance with too many people watching the wrong cues. The room was full clients in tailored jackets, a few board observers along the back wall, marketing hovering near the screens like stagehands. Trent stood at the front, relaxed and radiant, pacing just enough to look confident. Gavin sat off to the side, arms folded, scanning the room as if he owned it. I took a seat in the front row. Trent clicked through the opening slides. His voice smooth, rehearsed. He spoke about vision and scale, about unlocking value, about leadership. When he mentioned timelines, he skipped the risk caveats entirely. When he referenced compliance, he waved it away with a single line. Fully aligned. He said, already approved. I felt Gavin's eyes flick toward me. I didn't look back. Then the client's compliance director raised her hand. Before we proceed, she said calmly, can you confirm who signed off on the acceptance for this release? Trent didn't hesitate. I did. I stood. Before you answer that, I said, my voice steady and clear in the sudden quiet. We need to pause. Gavin shot up from his chair. Mara, sit down. I didn't. The doors at the back of the room opened, and Nina stepped in, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. She walked to the side of the stage and addressed the room. There is an active internal compliance hold on this project. She said, effective immediately. A murmur rippled through the audience. What does that mean? The client asked. It means, Nina continued, that we cannot proceed with a public demo or make contractual representations until the review is complete. Trent's confidence cracked. This is unnecessary, he said. We're aligned internally. Nina didn't look at him. She looked at the client. We're preventing a misrepresentation. Silence settled over the room. Thick and absolute. I finally met Gavin's gaze. His face had gone pale, not angry, not defiant, calculating. They had wanted a stage. What they hadn't prepared for was an audience that understood consequences. And once the words compliance hold are spoken out loud, there's no applause that can drown them out. The client didn't raise her voice. That was the part Trent hadn't anticipated. She closed her notebook with a quiet click and looked toward Nina, not him. We're suspending the contract, she said evenly. Effective immediately, pending the outcome of your internal review. No anger, no accusation, just a decision. A ripple moved through the room. Sales went rigid. Marketing froze mid-whisper. Someone at the back shifted their weight like they were calculating exits. Trent tried to recover. This is an overreaction, he said, forcing a smile that no longer reached his eyes. My team may have missed a step. But your team, the client asked. Head tilted slightly? Or you? Silence answered for him. Rafi, our sales director, finally spoke. We understand your position. He said carefully, we'll cooperate fully. He didn't look at Trent when he said it. He looked at me. I stood. Not to claim credit, but to put the timeline back where it belonged. I flagged the authorization issue 7 days ago. I said, in writing. Gavin shifted beside the stage. This isn't the time. He snapped. It is. The client replied before I could. Because misrepresentation carries penalties, and we don't reward organizations that confuse speed with governance. Trent opened his mouth again, then closed it. The confidence had drained out of him, replaced by something closer to disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Stages were meant to protect people like him. Phones buzzed across the room as internal alerts went out. Project paused. Compliance review initiated. All external communications suspended. The showcase dissolved into clusters of murmurs and half-formed excuses. People avoided eye contact, suddenly remembering meetings they needed to attend elsewhere. I gathered my notes slowly. I wasn't in a hurry. As I turned to leave, I caught Gavin's reflection in the glass wall. His jaw was tight, his expression already shifting from outrage to calculation. He would try to contain this, to redirect it. But containment only works when there's something left to contain. Behind me, the client's team was already packing up. The contract wasn't gone, not yet, but it was no longer theirs to control. And for the first time since this started, I felt it. Not victory, clarity. Because once consequences become public, they stop being negotiable. The meeting invite hit my calendar before I made it back to my desk. HR review mandatory attendance. Gavin's name was listed first, HR second. Mine last. The room they chose was small on purpose. No windows, neutral walls. The kind of space designed to make people speak softly and doubt themselves. Gavin didn't waste time. Your actions today embarrassed senior leadership. He said, you overstepped. You disrupted a client relationship. HR nodded, pen poised. Already halfway to a conclusion, I waited. When the pause stretched, the HR manager cleared her throat. Mara, we need to understand why you didn't escalate concerns through proper channels. I placed my folder on the table and slid it forward. I did. Inside were printed emails, timestamps highlighted, my warnings, my requests for written confirmation, the compliance policy excerpts Nina had cited, the message where someone asked a junior staffer to just sign. Gavin's jaw tightened. You're framing this to protect yourself? I'm documenting to protect the company. I said, there's a difference. The HR manager flipped through the pages. Slower now. Why didn't you raise this sooner? I did, I replied. 7 days ago. And again yesterday morning. Gavin leaned back, arms crossed. This could have been handled internally. It was, I said, until leadership ignored it. Silence settled over the table. Not the uncomfortable kind, the dangerous kind where narratives start to fracture. Then my phone vibrated. I didn't look at it right away. I didn't have to. The name on the lock screen reflected faintly in the polished table surface. Elliot Crane. Gavin saw it too. Excuse me, I said, standing. I need to take this. HR hesitated. Gavin opened his mouth to object. Then Elliot's name rang out again, insistently. I stepped into the hallway. Elliot didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask who was at fault. He asked 3 questions, sharp and efficient. Client status, legal exposure. And can you fix this? I answered each one without hedging. There was a pause on the line. Then, come to my office. Now. When I walked back into the room to collect my things, Gavin wouldn't meet my eyes. They'd tried to bury me with process. They forgot who understood it best. Elliot Crane's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same wide desk, same window overlooking the river, same silence that made people talk too much if they didn't know how to use it. He didn't ask me to sit. Instead, he asked 3 questions. Exactly as he had on the phone. Client status, contract suspended. I said, not terminated. Legal exposure containable. If we act fast and clean. And can you fix it? Yes. That was when he finally nodded and gestured to the chair. I laid out the plan the way I always had without adjectives. A clean room review. Reauthorization under proper compliance. Independent sign-off. A written apology to the client that didn't blame process gaps or miscommunication, but named the failure honestly. Elliot listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. Gavin tried to make this disappear. He said, Trent tried to make it look impressive. I didn't respond. They both failed. He continued, in different ways. He tapped a folder on his desk. Gavin is suspended pending investigation. Trent is off the project, effective immediately. I felt the tension in my shoulders release, just slightly. Then Elliot looked at me again. Sharper this time. Now here's the part most people get wrong. He said, I'm not offering you a trophy. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were 2 documents. One was a formal promotion title, authority, compensation, all in writing, control over the program, direct reporting line. The other was a severance and IP agreement. Clean exit. ownership of the core module I'd built, freedom to walk. You can stay and fix what they broke, Elliot said, or you can take your work and leave. Either way, no one takes it from you again. I read both pages carefully, then I pushed one back. I'll stay. I said, on conditions. Elliot's mouth twitched. I expected that. I named them plainly. Written authority. Protection for my team. No retroactive blame. No silent demotions disguised as restructuring. He signed without arguing. When I left his office, the hallway felt different. Quieter. Not because people were afraid, but because the noise had finally settled. Later that evening, Jewel messaged me. Are we okay? We are, I replied. And we're doing this right. I shut down my laptop and stood by the window, watching the city lights come on one by one. They'd tried to bury me with shortcuts and titles. What they forgot was this: I built the system. And systems remember who treats them with respect. If this story made you stop and think, hit like to support, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment with your perspective. We read everyone. You missed the point of the report. Grant said it like he was explaining something obvious to a child. Calm. Almost bored. The conference room smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. I swear he didn't even look at page 2. He didn't argue the numbers. That's the part that stuck. He didn't say they were wrong. He said I missed it. Like the problem was my perspective, not the data. That was the moment. That's the line. That's what ended my job. And yeah, months later, the SEC showed up, using my file as their map. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. 72 hours earlier, I was alone in my office staring at 3 years of ESG advisory payments. My name is Marlo Hensley. I've worked compliance long enough to know the difference between messy accounting and intentional structure. The costs had jumped almost 300% after Grant's first quarter as CEO. Not clean numbers. They moved $2,730,000, $2,880,000, $2,910,000. Slight shifts, but every year the total landed almost exactly the same. That's not sloppiness. That's calibration. The vendor was registered in a Back Bay condo, which, fine, plenty of boutique firms do that. But the registered agent, same one tied to a private investment group that quietly backed Grant's rise to the top. That's when my stomach dropped. Just a little. I overlaid 3 years of financials. Before Grant, after Grant. The curve bent exactly when he walked in. And here's the stupid part. I had approved one of those invoices months ago. It was smaller. Routine. I didn't think twice. That approval is in the system with my name on it. So when Grant said I missed the point, I kind of understood what he meant. He thought I didn't see strategy. He thought I was nitpicking, but I wasn't nitpicking. I was mapping a pattern. I should have stopped there. I should have just let it sit. People don't get promoted for digging into executive contracts. You know that, right? You don't win that game. Instead, I sent the email asking for deliverables. That's when it really started. I knew the standard procedure was the board's audit committee, but I wanted to give Daniel a chance to explain the variance before I pulled the trigger. That was my first mistake. Subject line request for ESG advisory deliverables. Short, clean. I asked for detailed scope documentation, work logs, personnel allocation, and quarterly output tied to the $2,730,000 invoice from last quarter. I copied Daniel Cho, our chief financial officer, and Claire Maddox in legal. Paper trail. That's how you survive in compliance. Daniel replied first. Is this a routine review? Marlo, it's variance follow-up. I wrote back. Costs increased significantly year over year. He paused before responding again. I could almost see him calculating. Grant is sensitive about ESG positioning right now. I typed, deleted, typed again. I'm sensitive about regulatory exposure. Claire didn't reply at all. 2 days later, the vendor sent over a slide deck, 30 pages, clean branding, a lot of words, not a lot of substance. I checked the file properties. created 48 hours earlier, so they didn't have standing documentation. They built something when I asked. I printed the quarterly board reporting summaries and laid them next to the payment logs. When I graphed the variance against revenue growth, the advisory cost curve didn't move with performance. It moved with leadership. That's not advisory work, that's allocation. I pulled archival logs through my compliance credentials, fully authorized. Every download stamped. I wasn't about to give anyone an excuse to call this rogue behavior. Then my calendar pinged. From Grant Lexford, subject strategic realignment. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. No context. Daniel messaged me privately 5 minutes later. Are you pushing this further? I'm reviewing it. I answered. Another pause. Be careful, he wrote. I stared at the screen for a long second. Careful meant quiet. Quiet meant compliant. I had already approved one of those invoices. My name is attached. I didn't cancel the meeting. I just added my variance charts to the folder. Grant didn't open with the report. He leaned back, folded his hands, almost relaxed. Marlo, I've been thinking about your role. That tone, corporate gentle, like I was about to get a gift. I think you're underutilized in compliance, he continued. You see risk before most people. That's valuable. But risk is only half the equation. I kept my folder closed on the table. What's the other half? Growth, narrative, alignment? He slid a printed document toward me. New title at the top, Ethics Strategy Innovation Lead. This would elevate you, he added. You'd shape how we present integrity. Bigger picture. And vendor oversight, I asked. That would transition to finance. There it was. Clean, polished, removal without saying removal. You're narrowing in on expense variance. He went on. That's tactical thinking. I need you operating strategically. I let the silence sit longer than usual. I used to admire how he talked like this. When he first came in, I believed the ESG push was real. He made it sound necessary, urgent, modern. Now I could hear the structure behind it. I prefer to complete the review I initiated. I told him. His jaw tightened just a fraction. Not anger. Assessment. You're misreading the intent, he replied. The advisory structure is part of a broader capital positioning model. Are you formally confirming the allocations are compliant? I asked. That changed the air. He didn't answer directly. You're focusing on optics. I'm focusing on exposure. He tapped the paper again. This is an opportunity, not a demotion. It removes audit authority, I said. He studied me for a second too long. You're good at finding problems. Marlo, don't become one. That landed heavier than I expected. I stood, gathered my folder. I'll continue the review. He nodded once. Calm again. Controlled. But I saw it then. The shift. He wasn't trying to move me anymore. He was deciding what to do with me. The HR conference room smelled like printer toner and something floral that tried too hard. Claire from legal was already seated. So was Brent from human resources. Grant stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Like this was a casual update. Brent started. Marlo, we've reviewed recent concerns regarding your conduct. I kept my voice even. Your approach has been disruptive to executive cohesion. He continued. There's concern you're escalating without alignment. Grant stepped in smoothly. You're missing what matters here. There it was again. Missing. I asked for vendor deliverables. I replied, that's standard review. You framed it as exposure, he said. That creates internal instability. Claire slid a folder toward me. This is a voluntary separation agreement. I opened it. 12 pages. Expanded confidentiality clauses. Broad non-disparagement. Language restricting disclosure beyond statutory obligations. You know as well as I do, Claire, that the SEC finds these non-disclosure sweeps illegal. You're not just firing me, you're handing me more evidence for a retaliation claim. Brent interjected quickly. It's standard language. It limits lawful reporting. I answered, I won't sign that. Grant let out a small breath through his nose. Not frustration. Disappointment. Like I was being impractical. Marlo. You've built a good career here, he told me. Don't let rigidity undo that. I initiated a compliance review. You escalated beyond scope. I followed variance. He picked up the bound report I'd brought, flipped through 2 pages. Then, without raising his voice, tore off the cover sheet. The sound was sharp, paper splitting. He dropped the rest into the trash can beside the table. "We're moving forward," he said. That was the decision. Not emotional, strategic. Brent pushed a pen toward me. "We'd prefer this ends cleanly. I'm not signing anything that restricts lawful reporting." I repeated. Claire's expression didn't change, but she closed her folder. Grant looked at me one last time. Calm. Certain. He thought I'd fold. Mortgage, insurance, mid-career risk. He was betting on stability. I stood up, gathered my bag. "I will document this." I told him. Nobody tried to stop me. By the time I reached the elevator bank, the red light on the scanner confirmed what I already knew. I was officially an outsider. My apartment felt smaller that night. Not dramatic, just tighter. The radiator clicked like it was counting down to something. I opened my banking app. Mortgage due in 12 days. The Cobra premiums to keep my son's coverage would eat half my remaining savings in a month. Savings that looked fine on paper until you imagined no paycheck behind it. LinkedIn notifications were quiet. A couple of open to work impressions. No messages. I opened the SEC draft. The cursor blinked at the top of the intake form. I'd already filled in most of it. Timeline. Vendor links. Retaliation notes. It was all there. Too real. I hovered over delete. If I walked away now, I could probably land somewhere mid-sized. Lay low, reset. Grant would move on. The board would stabilize. No headlines, no blacklisting. My phone buzzed. "Daniel, are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. They're telling people you were combative." I asked for documentation. Long pause. Just be careful. Careful again. After we hung up, I stared at the draft. My son's insurance form was still on the kitchen table. $872 a month. Stability has a number attached to it. I didn't miss that irony. I almost convinced myself this was ego. That maybe I'd pushed too hard. Then I opened the vendor file again. 3 years. Same structure, same curve, same quiet extraction. I didn't delete the draft. Instead, I searched for a whistleblower attorney in Cambridge and dialed the first number that specialized in SEC cases. A woman answered. Calm voice. "Law office of Andrea Patel. I need to know what happens if I submit something." I told her, and how protected I actually am. She didn't rush me. Start from the beginning. She said, "So I did." Andrea's office was smaller than I expected. Old carpet, a faint smell of coffee that had been reheated too many times. She didn't waste time. "Walk me through the timeline," she said, flipping open her notebook. "The pattern spans 3 years." I told her, but the confrontation happened fast. I flagged the variance last month, got the promotion offer a week later, and was fired 48 hours after that. She nodded once. "You started documenting before you were fired?" "Yes, that matters." I handed over the folder. Not dramatic. Just a manila folder with everything that could burn my career. She went page by page. "Vendor registered agent overlap," she murmured. "You confirmed beneficial ownership links indirect. Same trust administrator. Same investment group. And you requested deliverables formally. I copied legal and the CFO. Good." She paused at the metadata printout. "Created 2 days before submission." She read. "So no standing documentation." "Right." She leaned back. "This isn't retaliation driven. It's structural." I felt something shift when she said that. Not relief, just validation. "Be clear," she continued. "If we submit, the company will know eventually. You may not work in this industry again the same way." "I already don't," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "Then we submit correctly. We uploaded everything through the SEC whistleblower portal together. Timeline, ownership mapping, escalation emails, termination documentation, my digital signature, no music, no thunder, just a confirmation number on a gray screen." Andrea closed her laptop. "Now we wait. Waiting. That's the part nobody glamorizes." I walked out into the cold air feeling exposed. Not powerful, not heroic, just committed. And once you commit, you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. I didn't go to the town hall. I watched the live stream for 5 minutes before turning it off. Grant stood on stage in front of a slide that read record quarter. He talked about resilience, vision, alignment, at scale. He told the room, "We choose momentum over obstruction." I almost laughed at that. My phone buzzed halfway through. Email from corporate counsel, subject line. Reminder of continuing confidentiality obligations. Neutral tone, formal language. A few paragraphs about proprietary information and fiduciary duties. No direct accusation, just a gentle tightening around my throat. I forwarded it to Andrea. She called me within 10 minutes. "This is positioning." She said, "They're reinforcing boundaries. Is it a threat? It's insurance?" She replied, "For them." That's when another message came through. Signal notification. Ina. We hadn't spoken since my termination. "Are you safe to text?" She wrote. "Yes, IT froze archive deletion policies this morning." I stared at the screen. Across the company, I typed back, "Global hold." Legal flagged it. Preservation notice. Andrea had mentioned that step. Quiet, procedural. It meant someone external had requested records be retained. "Anything else?" I asked. "CFO looks stressed," she answered. Grant told leadership to stay focused. Stay focused. That's how you manage optics. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. The letter from counsel still open on my laptop. Grant still talking about alignment somewhere in a conference room I no longer had access to. For the first time since I submitted the file, I didn't feel alone in it. Something had moved, and it wasn't me. 3 months later, Andrea called before I'd finished my coffee. "It's formal," she said. "They issued a subpoena." I didn't react right away. "For what scope?" "Executive communications, vendor contracts, routing authorizations." It's broad. Broad meant they weren't fishing. They knew where to look. "Who's been notified?" I asked. "Company counsel, board leadership." My phone buzzed again. "Ina, it's real," she wrote. "CFO got pulled into a private meeting this morning. Not scheduled." I stepped outside and started walking toward the Charles River. Cold air. Diesel from a passing bus. I needed movement. Andrea stayed on the line. "This doesn't mean charges," she cautioned. "It means documentation." "I understand. Do you?" she pressed. "Once records are produced, narratives change." At noon, the company issued a statement about cooperating fully with regulatory inquiries. Stock dipped. Not dramatic. Just a small slide. Daniel texted me an hour later. "Did you know this was coming?" I suspected movement. Grant was on local business radio this morning. He wrote, talking about resilience. I didn't turn it on. Ina messaged again. Legal told everyone to preserve devices, no deletions, no edits. That's when it settled in. This wasn't rumor anymore. This was paper, servers, sworn responses. Andrea called back in the afternoon. "They'll start interviewing executives next. Starting with who finance she replied, "Of course." I kept walking along the river until my legs hurt. My name wasn't in the press release. Grant was still speaking confidently to investors. Publicly. Everything looked intact, but preservation orders don't freeze nothing, and subpoenas don't get issued for alignment workshops. Andrea called at 8:12 in the morning. It escalated, she said. No buildup. How expanded forensic authorization? They're imaging executive devices today. I was already pulling on my coat. This isn't a raid, she continued. Formal service? Court-backed? I know. Ina texted before I reached the subway. They're here. 2 messages. No punctuation. 3 men in dark suits carrying heavy laptop bags. No sirens. No windbreakers. Just the quiet efficiency of a federal audit. I didn't plan to go near the building. I told myself I wouldn't, but my train stopped in Seaport anyway. Muscle memory is a stupid thing. From across the street, I saw them walk in, dark jackets, calm steps. Not dramatic. No shouting. Reception didn't even look panicked at first. Ina sent another message. They went straight upstairs. That meant executive floor. My phone rang again. Daniel, do you see this? He asked. I'm nearby. They took Grant's laptop. He said, voice tight. And his phone, not arrest. Procedure. Board's an emergency session, he added. CFO's been with counsel since 7. A few minutes later, Ina called instead of texting. I shouldn't be doing this, she whispered. Then hang up. No. They brought a printed report into his office. I closed my eyes. Who's yours? She didn't need to explain. The same document he tore the cover off. The one he called narrow. The one he said missed the point. My internal tracking watermark was right there on the header, she went on. They referenced the exact timestamp I filed it. He knew it was me. What did he say? Nothing. He just stared at it. That image stayed with me longer than anything else. Not handcuffs. Not yelling. Just recognition. Daniel called again at 11:40. It's done, he said. What is board announced leadership transition? Effective immediately. The stock notification popped up on my phone seconds later. Down sharply. Media alert stacking. Grant wasn't arrested. He wasn't marched out in front of cameras. He was removed. That's cleaner. Colder. Andrea texted one line. This is consequence. I stayed across the street until noon passed. No applause. No victory music. People still walked into the building with coffee cups like nothing had shifted. But it had. He told me I missed the point. By midday, he didn't have a company to make that argument from anymore. Grant wasn't arrested. That's the part people always expect. No handcuffs, no flashing lights, no dramatic perp walk. The investigation is still ongoing. Andrea reminds me of that every time we speak. Don't narrate the ending too early. She told me over the phone last week. These things move slowly. I'm not narrating, I said. I'm adjusting. The board installed an interim CEO. Public statement about transparency. Independent review committee. Words like that? Daniel called me once. You were right, he said quietly. I documented. I corrected him. He paused. They're restructuring the advisory contracts. Good. We didn't talk about Grant again. I sit in a small cafe in the South End most mornings now. I keep my phone face down. I opened a boutique compliance advisory last month. Nothing flashy. 2 mid-sized clients so far. 1 manufacturing firm in Lowell. 1 biotech startup in Cambridge. My first client asked me, "Are you the one from the news? I'm the one who reads contracts." I told him. He smiled. That's what we need. Here's the thing I learned, and it's not dramatic. Integrity isn't loud. It's expensive. It costs sleep. It costs comfort. Sometimes it costs your title. People don't destroy themselves with 1 illegal transfer. They erode slowly. 1 justification at a time. 1 narrative shift. 1 you missed the point comment. And sometimes you go along with it longer than you should. I did. I signed one of those invoices. That part is mine. If you're still listening, hit like, leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever been told you were missing the point when you were actually looking too closely, because here's what I know now. They thought I missed the report. What I missed was how long they believed no one would look closely. 1 week after she fired me and denied my compensation, I walked back into that boardroom. And the CEO who told me, "This is my company, we play by my rules," couldn't even hold my eyes. I swear her hand was shaking, but that's later. It started at 9:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the calendar invite looked wrong. Not 9, not 9:30, 9:17. Who schedules anything at 9:17 unless they want you off balance? And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. My name is Lydia Russell. Until that morning, I was executive vice president of operations at a logistics firm in Minneapolis. I had been there 12 years. I knew every crack in that system. Every policy nobody else bothered to read. Victoria Dane was already sitting when I walked in. No small talk, no coffee, just that fake, calm voice she uses when she's rehearsed something. Lydia, we've decided to eliminate your position as part of strategic realignment. 3 minutes, maybe less. I didn't yell. Honestly, I didn't feel much at first, just heat in my ears. I asked one thing. To confirm this is without cause. She hesitated half a second. Yes, I nodded. Then she leaned back like she'd just won something. This is my company. We play by my rules. That's when I understood. This wasn't restructuring. This was timing. You know that feeling when someone smiles too confidently? Like they've already closed the door and thrown away the key? I didn't argue. That probably bothered her. I picked up my leather notebook, my access badge, the pen I'd signed contracts with for 10 years. The room smelled faintly like stale coffee and that weird lemon cleaner they use on the table. Here's the thing she thought I'd forget. Any contract over $5 million required my co-sign. I oversaw compliance review. I had blocked a $28 million logistics deal 2 weeks earlier because the margins didn't make sense. 17.8% above benchmark. I don't care how charming your cousin is. Numbers don't lie. And she fired me 48 hours before quarter close. Coincidence, sure. As I walked out, she didn't follow, didn't shake my hand. She offered me 3 months of base salary, the standard minimum, provided I signed a total liability waiver. It was a shut up and leave bribe. She thought I'd be grateful for the exit package, not realizing I was looking at the 8-figure equity she was trying to claw back. I almost did. I sat in my car for a long time, just breathing, thinking about whether fighting at 48 makes you brave or just stupid. Then I opened my email and searched one phrase, executive agreement. That's when everything actually started. I opened the envelope that afternoon in my kitchen. No ceremony, just paper against granite and the low hum of the refrigerator. I texted Daniel Avery, how bad? 3 months. I told him, they're ignoring the 12-month clause in my agreement and pretending the rest doesn't exist. A polite paragraph about wishing me well. Nothing about my executive agreement, nothing about equity acceleration. At the bottom, one neat line from corporate legal post-acquisition governance supersedes prior compensation structures. That line almost made me laugh. I texted Daniel Avery. We'd worked together years ago on a compliance issue. Free tonight, I wrote. He called instead of replying. How bad 2 weeks? I told him. They're pretending the agreement doesn't exist. Silence on the line. Then, did they say, without cause? Yes, I confirmed it. Good. He answered. That matters. I pulled the old metal lockbox from my closet. I keep boring things in there. Tax returns, insurance policies, the original executive agreement from 2012. The paper still had that faint, dry, dusty smell. I swear it felt heavier than it should have. 12 months base salary if terminated without cause, immediate vesting of outstanding equity, right to board-level review and disputes. And there it was, the ratification memo, signed by Victoria herself 2 years ago when the private equity group came in. She'd reassured investors that all executive contracts remained intact post-acquisition. I sent Daniel a photo. He called back within minutes. They can argue ambiguity. He said, but they can't erase a ratified contract with a handbook. She thinks I'll blink, I muttered. She thinks you won't want the fight. I stared at the date on the severance letter. It lined up exactly with the logistics contract closing. 48 hours before quarter end. Daniel's voice dropped. Lydia, this isn't about 2 weeks of pay. I knew. This was about my signature not being there anymore. I didn't need to hack back in. As a compliance officer, I had already mirrored the Northline file to my secure vault weeks ago when the margins first spiked. I wasn't stealing data. I was preserving a record of evidence of a breach I had already documented during my active tenure. The logistics file was right where I left it on my Drive vendor comparison sheets. Margin analysis, and the threads she thought she could delete. The logistics file was right where I left it. Vendor comparison sheets. Margin analysis, email threads I'd archived after the last tense meeting. The contract value, $28 million. Vendor name, Northline Freight Solutions. Ownership disclosure form attached. I opened it again. Blank. No mention that the majority shareholder was Mark Dane, Victoria's cousin. Same last name. Same lake house in Wayzata. I'd met him once at a holiday party. He shook my hand like I worked for him. I pulled the board minutes from the last quarterly meeting. No related party disclosure. Nothing in the governance notes. My phone buzzed. Daniel, tell me you found something concrete. Vendor's her cousin. I told him. No disclosure in board minutes. Pause. That's not automatically illegal, he replied, but it's radioactive if hidden. I blocked it 2 weeks ago. I continued. 17.8% above benchmark. CFO agreed. Recommended secondary bidding. And then she overruled. I forwarded him the internal email chain. The CFO refused to sign, but Victoria was planning to bypass the ERP system entirely using a special project override. Martin's CFO didn't fight her openly, but he left the rejection logs and the metadata, knowing I was the only one with the clearance to find them. Daniel exhaled slowly. Lydia, this is no longer a severance fight. I know. One more file. Governance Policy Manual, section on capital expenditures. Any contract above $5 million required dual approval. Chief Executive Officer and Executive Vice President of Operations. That was me. Without my cosign, the contract couldn't be executed under internal control policy. That's why she needed me gone before quarter close. I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic, not anger. Recognition. She didn't fire me to save money. She fired me to clear the runway. Daniel's voice came back through the speaker. If this goes to discovery, every internal email becomes evidence. I stared at the screen, cursor blinking over the word approved. That's when I understood this wasn't about my compensation anymore. It was about what she thought she could sign without me. Daniel's office smells faintly like old paper and burnt coffee. I sit across from him, hands folded, like I'm in a deposition instead of asking for help. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. If we file, he tells me, you're looking at 12 to 18 months. Minimum. I can handle that, I say too quickly. He tilts his head. Can you handle being labeled litigious? That lands harder. They could counterclaim breach of loyalty. He continues, argue you're leveraging internal information. I'm not leveraging. I push back. I'm enforcing. Court doesn't care about your intent. He replies, it cares about narrative. My phone buzzes on the table. I glance at it. A recruiter I'd spoken with 2 weeks ago. The message is short. Given the circumstances, we're going to pause conversations for now. I lock the screen without responding. Daniel watches me. That was fast. This city talks. I mutter. Minneapolis corporate circles aren't big. You don't fight quietly here. He leans back. You're not financially cornered. 12 months of salary isn't survival money for you. No, I admit. It's principle. Principle doesn't protect your reputation. That's when it hits me. I could win the contract and still lose the industry. I stare at the legal pad in front of him. So what do? We don't go after her directly. He says, we go to the board. He writes 3 names: chairman, audit committee chair, lead independent director, formal breach notice. He continues, frame it as governance risk, not personal grievance. And Victoria, we don't give her the first move. I nod slowly. This stops being about anger. It becomes positioning. Daniel slides the draft letter toward me. Once this goes out, there's no quiet exit. I pick up the pen. I sign anyway. The cease and desist arrived 2 days later. 8 pages. Heavy language. Polite threats. Ms. Russell is instructed to refrain from interfering in ongoing corporate operations. Any misuse of confidential materials will result in immediate legal action. I read it twice. My stomach tightened. I called Daniel. They're accusing me of interference. That's posturing. He answered calmly. They're trying to scare you back into silence. It's working. I admitted. They want you to doubt your footing. I don't like being framed as unstable. You're not unstable. You're inconvenient. He drafted a response within hours. All documents referenced were accessed during Ms. Russell's tenure under her compliance authority. Preservation of such records is consistent with fiduciary obligation. No emotion. Just position. Later that afternoon, Daniel forwarded something else. Audit committee had formally requested Victoria provide written explanation for the timing of my termination. The related party disclosure process for the logistics contract, that was movement, but not unity. Daniel relayed what he'd heard through outside counsel. One director pushed back. He told me. He said, we are not destabilizing leadership over severance. And Daniel's voice dropped as he relayed the meeting. The audit chair didn't hold back. He told them point blank that if Victoria signed without a cosign, their D&O insurance is voided. He asked the directors if they were willing to lose their personal assets just to protect her cousin's margins. I leaned back in my chair. Insurance. That's when it shifts from ego to liability. Daniel continued. If litigation opens discovery and related party disclosure wasn't handled correctly, the insurer may reassess coverage. And if coverage disappears, directors could face personal exposure. I didn't say anything for a moment. Victoria thought this was a personal power move. It wasn't personal anymore. It was about who would write the check if things went sideways. I almost missed it. Buried in an archived thread from 2 weeks before I was terminated. Subject line looked boring. Budget alignment. Nothing dramatic. Then I saw it. Victoria to Martin, our chief financial officer. Remove ops review before quarter close. I don't want delays. Sent 48 hours before I was fired. I stared at the timestamp longer than I should have. My pulse felt loud in my ears. Martin had responded earlier in that thread, margin exceeds benchmark. Recommends secondary bid before execution. No answer to that part. Just the directive to remove my review. I forwarded it to Daniel with one-line timing. He called within minutes. This isn't proof of misconduct. He began carefully. I know, but it establishes sequence. Sequence matters. She removed the compliance barrier. She removed you. We both went quiet for a second. Daniel assembled the packet that afternoon: executive agreement, ratification memo, termination letter confirming without cause, the email, procurement comparison showing 17.8% above market, absence of formal related party disclosure. He sent it to the audit committee's outside counsel. An hour later, he texted me. They've frozen the logistics contract pending internal review. I read that twice. Frozen. That deal was supposed to close before quarter end. Investors were watching revenue projections. Timing was everything. Victoria's strength had always been speed, push, execute, close. Now the clock wasn't hers anymore. Daniel's next message came through. She just lost momentum. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dark laptop screen reflecting my own face. She thought she was playing by her rules. She didn't realize timing works both ways. Daniel called me just after 6. They met in closed session. He said, no executives, just directors and outside counsel. I paced my kitchen while he talked. Outside counsel laid it out. He continued, if litigation happens, discovery opens internal communications. Meaning every email? I replied, every email. He went on. Related party transaction may require formal disclosure. If that was incomplete, it's regulatory exposure. I leaned against the counter. An insurance directors and officers carrier could reassess coverage. That landed in board language. That's blood in the water. What kind of exposure are we talking? I asked. $3 to $5 million in potential litigation costs alone. Daniel answered, not counting reputational damage or increased premiums. I let out a slow breath. He added, one director pushed back, claimed this was being inflated, called it an employment dispute dressed up as governance. Let me guess. I said, he was appointed by the private equity group. Daniel gave a small laugh. You know your board and the audit chair. He reminded them of fiduciary duty. His words, we are not here to protect management. We are here to protect shareholders. That shifted the room. Victoria tried to frame it as destabilization. She argued that allowing former executives to challenge decisions sets a dangerous precedent. Daniel's tone sharpened. Precedent is not the issue. Exposure is... I pictured her at the table, pushing hard, voice tight but controlled. And then I asked, they invoked your contractual right to board review. She objected. Procedurally overruled. I stopped pacing. For the first time since 9:17 that morning, I felt the axis tilt. It wasn't about who was louder. It was about who controlled the process. And that wasn't her anymore. 1 week after she walked me out, I walked back in. Same boardroom, same long table. The air smelled faintly like coffee that had been sitting too long. The skyline outside looked gray, flat, like winter never really leaves this city. Victoria was already seated, but the bravado was gone. She knew the board was now looking at her not as a leader, but as a liability to their personal net worth. Just kept tapping her pen against a legal pad. Too fast, too sharp. Daniel pulled out my chair for me. No drama, just placement. Victoria spoke first. She has no standing in this meeting. Chairman Reynolds didn't raise his voice. She does. Under the agreement you signed, that landed harder than anything else in the room. Victoria's jaw tightened. This is an internal management matter. Daniel slid the folder across the table. It's a contractual enforcement matter. He opened the packet. Executive agreement. Ratification memo. Termination confirmation marked without cause. The email removing ops review. Procurement comparison. Absence of related party disclosure. No commentary. Just sequence. Audit chair leaned forward. Miss Ute. Russell's co-sign authority was required on contracts above $5 million. It was a timing adjustment. Victoria cut in. Daniel didn't look at her. 48 hours before quarter close, a director cleared his throat. Why was a related party disclosure not recorded in board minutes? Victoria finally met my eyes. It was informal. Everyone was aware. Board minutes reflect no such acknowledgement. Audit chair responded evenly. I stayed quiet. Let the paper speak. Chairman Reynolds folded his hands. We are reviewing governance exposure, not debating personalities. Victoria's tapping stopped. Daniel turned one more page. The company has potential exposure between $3 and $5 million if litigation proceeds. That excludes reputational cost. The room shifted. Not loud, just heavier. For the first time, Victoria wasn't directing the pace. She was reacting to it. And silence was no longer her tool. The room had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel temporary. Outside counsel cleared his throat. If litigation proceeds, discovery will open internal communications. That includes executive correspondence. Victoria leaned back. This is disproportionate. We're discussing severance. Daniel didn't blink. We're discussing contract enforcement. A director on the far end shifted in his chair. What's the potential exposure? Daniel answered evenly. $3 to $5 million in projected litigation costs. That does not account for reputational impact or derivative shareholder claims. Victoria's voice tightened. There's no misconduct here. Audit chair looked directly at her. The issue is disclosure. Outside counsel added, if related party disclosure was incomplete, directors and officers' insurance coverage may be reassessed. That landed harder than anything else had. Victoria glanced around the table. Not searching for agreement, searching for backup. No one stepped in. Daniel slid a single page forward. There are two paths. He didn't dramatize it. Option 1, full enforcement of the executive agreement. 12 months base salary, immediate vesting of equity, legal fees. Victoria exhaled sharply. And option 2, litigation, Daniel replied. Discovery, potential regulatory inquiry, insurance carrier review. The chairman folded his hands. Russell, do you have anything to add? I hadn't spoken yet. My palms were steady. That surprised me. I looked at Victoria. Your rules don't outrank the law, that was it. No speech, no anger, just record. Victoria opened her mouth, then stopped. Her face didn't flush. It drained. The confidence she walked in with thinned out like air leaking from a tire. A director who defended her earlier stared at the table instead of her. Chairman stood. We'll recess. Chairs moved. Papers gathered. Victoria didn't look at me as she walked out. For the first time since 9/17, the room didn't move around her. It moved around the contract. The board called me back in after recess. No speeches, no apology. Chairman Reynolds kept it direct. The board has voted to enforce the executive agreement in full. Victoria didn't look at me. Audit chair read it off like numbers on a balance sheet. 12 months base salary, immediate vesting of outstanding equity, legal fees covered, standard non-disclosure agreement with carve-out allowing cooperation if required by law. Daniel glanced at me. You're comfortable with those terms, I am. I answered. Victoria finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but thinner. This resolves the matter. It enforces the contract. Daniel corrected gently. I signed, not triumph, not relief, just completion. No press release, no LinkedIn statement. I didn't want a victory lap. I wanted closure that didn't feel cheap. 3 months later, I was sitting with a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Minneapolis Business Journal headline, Victoria Dane steps down to focus on strategic transition. No mention of dispute, no mention of me. Daniel texted right after. Timing, I typed back. Records matter. He responded with a simple. They always do. That night, I thought about something I hadn't said out loud. Contracts aren't just paper. They're memory. They're proof of promises made when everyone was smiling. The real test comes when those smiles disappear. You don't fight every battle. Honestly, most aren't worth it. But if someone tries to erase what you built, what you earned, what was signed in ink, that's different. If you've ever been pushed out quietly, if you've ever been told to accept less because it's easier, They thought my level was about middle management. They forgot that at any level, the person who keeps the receipts is the one who owns the room. Or just sit with this and remember something simple. Power talks loud, paper talks longer. She said we play by her rules. She forgot contracts don't.